On this episode, we are talking about how we use Slack, how I would get my first client if I had to start over, and about how we're figuring out profitability. Enjoy. Well, everyone, welcome to another episode of the Steele Entrepreneur Show. As Brandon just informed me, this is episode 12. I thought it was episode 11. This is episode 12 of the Steele Entrepreneur Show. As you know, we are on YouTube. We're on Facebook. We're trying to get people listening to the podcast because I'm a podcast kind of guy. I do not watch these videos. I do not watch our videos. I do not watch anybody else's videos. I'm not going to be sitting watching a video because that time I'm going to be working. So it's going to be the downtime, like when I'm washing dishes or something like that, then I'm going to be listening to a podcast. So check us out on iTunes. We're on SoundCloud. We're on Stitcher. And we're now on Google Play as well for your listening pleasure. I don't cater these too much towards the podcast peeps, but every time before I come in and tape a show, in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, do something special for the podcast peeps. But it never happens. So I do promise something in the future. I'm thinking like I did this interview with Michael Urechko, really super smart sysadmin dude, friend of mine, has done some work for me in the past, and just tremendously smart human being. We talked about all kinds of cool stuff, and I was thinking these recordings that I do with our lead copywriter, copy director, Chris. I suck at writing blogs, so he helps me like take what's in here and put it out there. And I was thinking, like, what if I just, because I ramble on these things, like, what if I just grab that and just upload it to iTunes and SoundCloud and stuff and see how that goes? So there will be some stuff coming. But without further ado, let's get into the show. Brandon, what do we have for the first? Sorry, I'm terrible at remembering these questions, these topics.
How to get your first client?
Yeah, this is a question I made up because it was. With every business that we start, there's always, we're not quite starting from scratch, but I get into this zone where it's kind of like I'm introducing people to a new idea, perhaps something that they've not heard of before, certainly not something that we've offered before. And a lot of times I'm, approaching new people for the absolute first time, first customer, trying to get that first person on board and pitching them on my idea. Now, I have a little bit of an advantage because I have an email list, because I have a business network, because I have people, and God bless them, that will, I can pitch them something. They bought from me before, they've hired me before, and they will try out just about anything. Shout out to Conrad. He's one of those guys that comes to mind who will quite literally buy anything. As long as it makes a little bit of sense, he's going to check it out, and I love that and I appreciate that. So if I didn't have any of that, if I had to go back 7 years and start from scratch, or 6 years or 7 years, I one of these days I'm going to have to count it. There are three angles that I would work on. The first angle, and I think the most important angle, is to work the network that you already have, which is family and friends. There is someone in the network that you don't even realize you have. There is somebody in there that will hire you, assuming you can convince them to do so, that, assuming that you have something worthwhile for them to purchase or hire you for. And that's not always the case. I know when I started selling stuff, no one hired me. And it was, looking back at it now, is because I didn't know what the fuck I was talking about. I was trying to sell something I didn't understand, and people could see through that. And so my first customer wasn't somebody I met face to face. It was somebody I fooled into hiring me through the internet. And I mean, I think I did good work. I mean, maybe relative to now it wasn't good work, but at the time it was, the best I could do. But I had to, I sort of, not tricked, but I really had to work at it and convince that person to hire me. But there is somebody within your network that will hire you. So my first step would be talk to literally everybody. Annoy the hell out of everybody in your network and explain what it is that you're doing, what it is that you aim to do. And not only will that help get the word out, but it'll help you get better at your pitch, help you get better at explaining what it is that you're trying to offer here, so that when that actual qualified or good lead comes around that may actually buy what it is that you're selling, you're going to be a heck of a lot better at explaining it. You might actually have a chance at converting that person into an actual buyer. But what I would ask those people in your network is, would you buy this, first of all? Could you buy this? Will you buy this? But if not, do you know somebody that I could talk to? Do you know two somebodies within their network that you could talk to a little bit more about this? Somebody that might be interested in just hearing you chat about it, or might be interested in hiring you for it. And if you have, let's say 10 people in your network, multiply that by 2 people per person, and all of a sudden you're having way more discussions. So you're bound, just from a numbers standpoint, you're bound to come across somebody who can lead you to somebody who's going to buy your service. So that's the first thing that I would do. The second thing that I would do, and now hopefully I'll remember the third thing. I'm already forgetting it. It's not on that list. Sorry, Brandon. I typed it out and then forgot to bring it. The second thing is just get involved in your community. And and by that I mean your local community, especially if you're selling something to people locally. So if you're a restaurant, get to know all the restaurateurs around you, especially walking distance. Get to know all these people. I've seen that work super, super well. But also, if you're maybe a digital product, or you're selling over the internet, or perhaps you do business over the phone, or you never really get to meet people face to face, or maybe at the start you don't get to meet people face to face, I would connect with your community. I would connect with your online community, where you would find where people, not necessarily where your buyers are hanging out, though that certainly has its own merits, but where are your contemporaries hanging out? And that may seem a little bit strange, go where all your competitors are, talk to your competitors, things like that. But quite honestly, that I can remember that being one of the biggest game changers for me was coming out of my shell, getting out of my little sort of cave of, I know everything, these people know nothing, I can beat all these people, and instead, embracing them for, as people that are honestly way the hell ahead of you and understand way more than you, and understand different things about what it is that you guys collectively do. And so for me, it was, online forums, it was social, it was, majorly it was internet marketing forums for me. Mainly, wickedfire.com at the start, back in 2010, that was sort of, that was where I got to know other people in my industry and got to learn about what they were doing in my industry. And it was really, quite honestly, through those connections that I was able to get my first couple of customers. It was from meeting my competitors, because there was work in a lot of cases that they didn't want to do. That was, they had outgrown, or they were, they had sort of moved up to sort of better or different type of work. And so it was them it was them that referred work to me, just by getting to know them and trying to help them in whatever little way that I could, or just being straight up friendly. A lot of people just aren't friendly on these forums. They're combative, they're aggressive, they're, I know better than you. If you can be humble and you can be thirsty and show that you're hungry, people will respond positively to that. And I found in a lot of cases, people are happy to send you leads that they're not maybe interested in, and they may not be high quality, so you just have to take it in stride. But eventually some will pan out. So I found that to be really helpful. And today, or at least actually, I think it was probably a year and a half in, I was blogging at this point, trying to get what little I had learned at that point, and some of the unique stuff, or my unique approach at that point, which was, I guess, a little bit on the shadier side of things, you could say. A little bit, a nice way to put it would be a little bit outside of the box. Well, that approach was still very new, or misunderstood, or just not understood by my contemporaries. And so what I found, I was like, why aren't people, I was getting traffic, people weren't leaving comments, people weren't tweeting this stuff out. And I later understood what that was about. But what I found out, and this was much thanks to a fellow by the name of Matthew Hunt here in Canada. He invited me to this, I think what he called at the time, a local SEO mastermind group on Skype. So this was before the time of like Slack groups and things like that. He invited me to this Skype group, and it had people that frustrated me, but I also frustrated me because I couldn't, I don't know, I guess I couldn't find a good way to reach out to these people. Like, it was just, maybe I wasn't humble. I was just, I guess the opposite of humble. And I thought I knew better than these people and things like that, which was absolutely not the case. But I think I was just afraid. I was afraid of reaching out to these much more intelligent than myself, much more successful than myself people. And so what really surprised me was that when I got invited into this group, these people were really interested in what I was doing. And these people are, very, a lot of these people are like really traditional, in what I do. So internet marketing, we call them kind of like white hats, people who do it kind of by the book, and for good reason do it by the book. And so that, when they started expressing, so much interest and really wanting to understand what it is I did in my approach and my understanding of different things, it really surprised me. And I'm sure there are a lot of different lessons in there beyond what I'm trying to get at right now. But some of these people became my greatest advocates, and to this day send me business. And it was not long after joining that group that things really took off for me, that these folks started referring stuff to me regularly, and my business just went from something that was very small and desperate and just trying to take on any work that I possibly could, to a point where leads were coming in regularly and things were really starting to grow. So embracing your community, and not just your local community, but your sort of where people online are hanging out, was super, super powerful. I'm gonna grab that. There's one other thing.
Can I ask you a follow-up for that one?
Pass my phone first. Thank you, sir.
So, what if somebody is in an industry that has a little bit more of an old school community that's less online based, like their competitors? I'm thinking more for their competitors.
Can you give me an example, perhaps?
Well, okay, yeah. Off the top of my head, I'm thinking a lot of videography companies don't have a big online presence, and don't function online. A lot of
that surprises me a little bit.
Yeah, I think it's more of a new age thing that videography companies are getting into. But as far as I know, the groups of videographers around here are like a bunch of old guys and dads and stuff, and so they just yeah, they just do the work that they've had with the clients they've had for a
Yeah.
while, and not much of an online presence. But I'm sure there's other businesses too, right?
Well, I think, and maybe there are some industries that are just sort of like this. And it's just, like I said, it surprises me that videography is one of them. But I'm thinking of my girlfriend's industry, which is, wedding planning and things like that. Those folks, while you'd think, and they do, really embrace social and embrace, the web, they seem to really embrace or prefer, perhaps, that sort of belly-to-belly. It's a weird way of putting things. One of my clients said that the other day. Belly-to-belly, or handshake, like person-to-person type thing, face-to-face type communication. And so, that's a very sort of localized type of business now, isn't it? You're not really doing a lot of work online. You're doing it locally, right? So I would imagine your community, because of the nature of that particular business, they're more inclined to prefer, perhaps, or flock towards meeting face to face. And I know in her industry they have lots of events throughout the year where it'll be what do they call like vendor meetups or vendor fairs, where vendors share some of their different stuff that they're doing for weddings, like food and like catering and different, I don't know, flowers. I don't really it's not an industry that I understand super well, but maybe that's sort of the same thing. Is and I think it would make sense for you to be at those events, because you do some of you do a little bit of wedding videography and that kind of thing. So I don't know where videographers in general would hang out, but maybe there are these pockets like the wedding industry where it would make sense to find yourself, something like that. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know too much, but there's one other thing on this topic, and I'll be quick because we still have two others to go over, is doing work for free. And I've heard this talked about a lot of times, and I think there's a lot of companies that really take advantage of free work, or interns and young people, students. And I think that's, I think it's hard to judge without knowing, the full story. There's a couple groups in town here that I know I've heard some pretty awful stories about. They're the only big sort of tech game in town, and so everybody wants to work for them, and so they get these students to work for near nothing. But I guess you really have to understand, appreciate, or otherwise what they're getting in return, what sort of exposure. I know when I didn't work for free, but I worked for almost near free relative to what I had been making at other companies previous to it. When I worked at an affiliate marketing company, I was an intern and I made very little. And I mean, I have to thank my experience at that company for everything that came afterwards to this date. I probably wouldn't have known about SEO. I probably wouldn't have known about so many of the things that they exposed me to during that very short 5-6 month stint, or maybe it was 8 months that I was there. So I think there's value in going to work for somebody in an industry that you're interested in, because one, you can gain that knowledge so that when you do talk to people, you actually know what the fuck you're talking about. But two, just find somebody who's got who's well connected, who's maybe got an audience, who has been around for a while and can connect you with potential clients, and do some work for them for free. Don't go bankrupt doing it or anything, right? But offer them a couple hours per day, or an hour per day, or a set amount of hours per week, or just some project-based work. And I would be very clear about your expectations. Just be like, hey, I'm doing this for free because I want X out of it. And I can't imagine them not understanding that. They would appreciate the free work. They would appreciate that you're trying to leverage them, leverage their network to get somewhere else. And as long as the expectations are clear and they fulfill their end of the of the agreement, and of course you do the same, then that should lead you to maybe. I mean, I've seen people do it where it gives them a huge head start because of the network that particular individual that they went to work for or did some work for free had. Otherwise, they would have been hustling little clients here and here and here and here, and that it would have taken a hell of a lot more time to get to these big fish. Where all this guy that you did some work for had to do was just say, hey, this is my guy. And that person got that hookup, and immediately they were in, and they could then leverage that client for a bigger client, and more clients. And quite honestly, if I could go back, that would probably be something that I would do, and didn't do, probably because of pride or misunderstanding, or I just didn't know to do it. No one told me to do that sort of thing. So, yeah. Those are 3 good ways that I would go about getting my first client. Brandon, anything that you think I missed that you would do, or?
No, I thought that was great.
Cool. What time are we at right now? We're probably at 20 minutes on one question. God damn it. I'm so bad. Okay, so we've got 2 others. I want to talk a little bit about Slack, and then I want to talk a little bit about profitability. Slack is an amazing tool. Everybody's heard about it by now. And if you haven't, check it out, slack.com. It is a team collaboration. It is a messenger for business, essentially. And it is grown absolutely massive. And it has been a huge thing for my business. It brought a company that was pretty much based on Skype, because we're a remote business, a remote client service digital marketing business, and everybody is worldwide. And so we used, at the time, much smaller team, mind you, but we used Skype to communicate. And the team was disjointed. The team had no idea what the other person was doing. Everybody was just off in their own world. Nobody was communicating together. I'm sure we probably could have used Skype groups, assuming they existed back then. I imagine they might have, and I just didn't think to use one. But no one knew what was going on. They just did their own thing, and that was it. 2 years ago, we switched to Slack, and we took this disjointed, disorganized, unfriendly, quite honestly, team, and not overnight, but quite quickly, we gained or grew or created some semblance of company culture, something that you'd almost only expect in a workplace environment where people actually brush shoulders and work together and that kind of thing. We don't have quite the culture that a company like that would have, but way more culture than you would expect any sort of remote company to have. And that I can't put my finger on exactly what did it, but Slack was absolutely the catalyst that brought us together. And I think in part it has a little bit to do with how we organized Slack, and that's kind of what I want to run through, because I've had a couple questions about this. They started with Trello, they started with Scrum, and now people are seem to be interested in how we've organized Slack and some of our Slack integrations and bots and things like that. I'll go over it quickly. And I think this is kind of where Slack is going, is they want to be the hub for everything. And so we've really embraced that. They are the center of all our operations. Everything, all roads lead to Slack, essentially. And what I mean by that is, if a client pings us on their board in Trello, we get hit up in Slack. That's through just a straight up simple native integration between Slack and Trello. If we start getting hammered, if one of our sites starts getting hammered, either the server lets us know through something custom that we've created, or Google Analytics lets us know from just referrals. So if we get X amount of referrals to a site in X amount of time, it warns us and lets us get on top of that or add it to our Google Analytics blacklist or segment. What else do we have? I'm missing a whole bunch of them, like Uptime Robot. So if like a site goes down, we hear about it. I'm missing some really good ones. They're not coming to me. They'll come to me later. But, like sales stats, for example. So if we make a sale, it lets us know. And that one's a little bit custom, but like there are a lot of native integrations. And if there are native integrations, there's Zapier. And if there isn't Zapier, if there's something very custom you want to do, a good, a programmer worth his weight can certainly work it out, because Slack is just so friendly for those types of integrations and that sort of customization. And so the way that beyond those integrations, the way that we've set things up is we have basically we've created channels for clients and projects. So a client, assuming they're sort of large enough to warrant it, would have their own board in Trello and thus have their own channel in Slack. And the idea is we want everything to be discussed in the same place. We don't want private DMs going back and forth about a client, because yes, the two people talking about it understand it, but everybody else doesn't hear about that. And so people miss things, people forget to include people on things, and just generally, it's important that people understand what other people are working on, because there are parts, maybe, Chris and somebody and Serge are working on a particular thing, and Hugo knows that he's going to have to work on this particular thing very soon. So if he sees Chris and Serge talking about, almost being done, he knows that he's going to have to be ready for it. Or if somebody has to search some details related to a client, a discussion that happened, they're not going to be able to find it. Somebody else that wasn't privy to that, DM conversation, direct message conversation, they're not going to be able to find it in the DMs, but they will find it in one of our client channels. Same thing with projects. We've set them up the same way. So any project that, again, warrants their own channel or their own board in Trello would, like I said, get their own channel. We would communicate in that channel. So the magistrate has their own channel. A client would have their own channel. Loganics has their own channel. And then even products of Loganics, again, that warrant it, Loganics Premium, where we have a whole whack of clients, there we need a channel there to manage that effort. Loganics Editorial, very complex orders. We need a channel to organize that sort of thing. And then beyond that, and this, I must credit this with a lot of that company culture that we've sort of built, is beyond that, we've created channels, like just a general channel for stuff related to the business or businesses, or just stuff that sort of generally related to all clients, or maybe something related to we're trying to pick out a new rank tracker right now to track how our sites are improving in Google. We have a channel called Good Finds. So if we want to share something with the rest of our team, something we've read that we think is really good and everybody else should read it, we have them post that in Good Finds. We have a channel called Ratchet, which we share anything funny we find online, anything ridiculous we find online. Since we are online all day, we tend to dig up some pretty crazy stuff. And I think that kind of makes up the most of it. But I think the most important thing is you have to really sort of enforce and encourage people to use that as the hub. That has to be kind of the center of it all. That's how it works. That's how it should work if you're using Slack. That's where things, conversations need to happen, and they need to be shareable, and they need to be available to everybody else on the team. So that's how we structured that. And the last thing, and I'm going to try and rush through this. So we don't make this too any more longer than it already is going to be. We talked about, I don't remember what episode it was in, but we talked about profitability and P&Ls and things like that in the past. And I had mentioned that we had been having quite a bit of trouble tracking, how much money we were making from a client, at the end of the month. And we'd been using QuickBooks, and we had this really complicated process of tracking these payments and expenses and all that kind of thing. We basically set it up with classes, so each client would get a class in QuickBooks, and then we would just draw a simple P&L there. But it wasn't so simple, because the way that we track things, we time track. So I want to know, what each team member is doing at any given moment, so that I can sort of figure out, was that a good use of time? Are they moving at an acceptable speed, et cetera, et cetera. So we bill our time a little bit like lawyers, except we don't bill the client. So we bill time to the client project, and then basically I pay that, or the company pays that. And so, we're able to look at a particular client project for basically like a week in FreshBooks, for example, and see, okay, John spent X amount of time on X task, and Serge spent this amount of time on, this task, and then he worked on the same client and worked on this task instead, and spent, 2.23, hours on that. But what was tricky is when I would get an invoice, I would have all that detail, right? And so when we needed to assign each one of those costs or time investments, or sections of time to the particular client, so that I could run a P&L against, again, what they paid us and what we spent essentially to provide that service, they would have to go in as separate journal entries into QuickBooks. And, it would look like, Serge, $40, he worked, X amount of minutes, and, put that in. And then, his invoice, that would just be a very small piece of his invoice. He would have 40 other entries that would be a part of that invoice, and each one of those entries would have to make their way into QuickBooks under one of these classes. And we're talking about hundreds of entries every single day. And that doesn't even count like, actual expenses from, just like credit card expenses or bank expenses that would be applied to those classes as well. So it was a nightmare. It was a nightmare for our accounting team, and it got to a point where they didn't want to keep up, and it was just impossible pretty much for them to keep up. So for the last little while, we've been really kind of running the business by feel, by gut, with a broken windshield. We haven't known how well we're doing on a particular account. And I've run into this in the past before, where things got really out of hand because we ran the business like that for too long. We decided that we couldn't find anything that could sort of solve our problem, as long as we wanted to keep that sort of, I don't know if the word is granularity, I think that's a word, that sort of granular detail. We couldn't find something to do that. And so when in doubt, put Josh on it. Josh is one of our very talented programmers, and everybody should have a Josh. I don't think it really matters what space you're in. There's so much that a programmer can do for you that if I could go back, he would be one of my first hires, is somebody who is capable of automating things and making things more efficient and quicker, and just cutting down the sort of the amount of labor hours that were involved in these silly processes. So he's built a system, and I don't have the technical specs for it, nor do I really, fully understand them. It usually takes me a while, many times, him explaining different pieces of code for me to really grasp it. But basically, he's built a system that goes into FreshBooks, pulls a report, and he's thrown this on sort of a junk server, and he pulls these reports from FreshBooks, where all that time information is, time and how much that time cost, and which project that time was allocated to, pulls all that. And then he's able to basically summarize all that all that information. Right now we're working on PayPal and Stripe integrations, but basically summarize all that information into a dashboard so that I'm able to see live at any given time, because it's constantly pulling, how the health of each organization or each company or each product or each service or each client is doing at any particular time. I can pull one of our clients and be like, okay, they paid us this, and so far this month we've spent exactly this much on on them. And believe it or not, that was a tricky thing for us to accomplish in any piece of software that we tried out. It was tough to get this sort of dashboard created. There were sort of these, ways we could hack it, but it was never, this sort of system. So now I'm going to have this beautiful dashboard that I'm going to be able to get, wake up in the morning, check the dashboard, see how we're doing. I'm going to be able to run reports, all that kind of stuff. But what's even better is now he's going to be able to summarize that information. I won't require my bookkeeper to break things out by class, in the same way that we did before, because all that information, the goal of all that information was to give me those very granular P&Ls. I have that now. So she doesn't need, the bookkeeper and the accountants, they don't need to worry about that anymore. They can just, associate the expense or the invoice with the company, or at the very most, if Serge, for example, works on 3 different companies, that's just 3 different journal entries. That's it. Whereas before it was, a single invoice from him would be like 20, 25, 30, 40 different journal entries. Times that by all the team members we have, it's a fucking nightmare. Times that by, we pay people weekly. So that's times that by 4 invoices per person. It became impossible and certainly cost prohibitive. The idea of updating you on this, or the reason I'm updating you on this, is I am assuming, based on some of the questions that I get and conversations that I have, that other people are having these same or similar problems. And so I want to share some of the problems that we're facing and how we deal with them. And that one took, 3 or 4 weeks for us to kind of figure out, mostly because we're just busy. But I wanted to update you guys on that and let you know that how we were able to solve that. It's still very far from solved, but very soon we're going to have sort of a final product. And I think what I'll do is I'll share a screenshot of a few different things and how that is kind of working. So I think that's all that I had to say on that particular subject, or the 3 subjects, or the 2 subjects before it. Brandon, I'm not forgetting anything?
Sounds like you hit a lot of points.
How many minutes are we at? How many?
35 plus.
Every time I come in here, I'm like, we're going to bang this out in 15 minutes. It never happens. And I don't think I'm rambling. I mean, now I'm rambling, but I don't think that anyways, I hope that it's value packed. Like that's always the goal. And I think people are enjoying it. If you are, I hope you'll let me know, because it does. I mean, I am a human being. It does help to get a little pat on the back occasionally and to be reminded that I'm not wasting my time. So a comment, a like, a share, we're on Facebook, we're on YouTube, we're on Instagram, we're on SoundCloud, we're on iTunes, we're on Google Play, we're on Stitcher, we're blogging, we're doing all kinds of things. So there is always a place where you can let us know what you're liking, what you're not liking. If you have any questions, I would love them. I'd love to feature them on the show. I'd love to talk to you in person and or just over the phone and try and help you in whatever way I can. So do let me know, please. Leave a comment. I'm here. I'm open, and I'm ready to take on some of these questions. If you haven't subscribed yet, I hope that you will. I hope that you'll take a minute out of your time and maybe share the show with a friend, somebody that might find this useful. Maybe somebody who hasn't quite taken the leap yet, and might be interested in some of the things that we have to say here. Maybe might give them the courage that they need to take that leap. And if I can do that, man, that would be everything that that would mean everything to me. That would be everything that this show is about. It's about not only getting people to take the leap, but then helping them once they take that very important leap. So thank you, everyone. I appreciate your time. I appreciate your attention. I know there are so many other things that are fighting for your attention, so it means so much that you would take the time to spend 30 plus minutes out of your day with us. And like I said, comments, likes, subscribe, leave a review on iTunes, on SoundCloud, on whatever. I don't even know if you can leave comments on or reviews on SoundCloud, but if you can, please do. And we will see you again on episode 13 of the Steele Entrepreneur Show. Thanks, guys. Have a good one.